There are two major roots to the tree that we call the Western civilization. They are, of course, the Greeks and the Romans. We have so far looked at some cultures in the East that are at the foundation of the West, but we now turn to the two big roots that form the central tradition of Western culture. And as we begin to look at the Greeks, we must first start with uh, three of the ancestors of the Greeks that will, in a sense, beget the great Greek civilization of Athens and Sparta, and the legacy that they will leave within our culture. And three early Aegean being the sea around which the Greek cultures survive, live, dwell. Um, the early Aegean civilizations are three, in a sense, a historical order. And I have put generic dates, centuries, in which these three play out. The Cycladic is the first one we're going to take a quick look at, is the earliest of the Greek early civilizations. And it exists in the third millennium before Christ, from around 3000 to 2000 before Christ. The second we're going to look at is called the Minoan, and it pops up around 2000 before Christ and comes to a abrupt halt with a natural disaster of a tsunami, an explosion of a volcano, most probably around the middle of the 15th century before Christ, so around 1450. The third we're going to look at are called the Mycenaeans, or the Mycenaean civilization. And it is probably the most famous, most well-known, because the names of the Iliad, Troy, Achilles resonate in movies and in tales, even in modern times. The Mycenaean culture that is the origin of these figures, characters, stories, starts popping up on the scene of history around 1650 before Christ, and plays out until around 1100 before Christ, when they are overrun by a new people tribe called the Dorians. In this particular lecture, we're going to look at the first two of these early Aegean civilizations, the Cycladic and the Minoan. So let's start with a look at the world of that time. We have moved finally to the western part of the world. We're looking at the Mediterranean Sea, and you can see where, in general, the Roman and Greek civilizations grow up. The Roman, of course, the boot of Italy that sticks out in the Mediterranean, it looks like a boot. In the Greek, in the peninsula called the Balkan Peninsula, it sticks out in the Mediterranean, and in particular on the islands that are just off the coast in that sea that's called the Aegean Sea. Therefore, the term early Aegean civilizations. So please focus on where it says Greek on that map, and that's where we're going to start our story of the early Greeks. And as I've come to that now, more particular with this map, the tip end of the Balkan Peninsula shows a lot of islands. And in particular, I'd like you to locate 12 islands, or a group of islands, that are right there in the middle of your map and form more or less a circle. The word Cycladic is a Greek word that means circle, kyklos. And it is in the islands that are right there in the middle of the map there that we have the earliest Greek civilization, of which we know very little. And so we will not spend much time. What we have remnant from their existence in the third millennium before Christ, from around 3000 to 2000 BC, are artifacts like this. This is obviously looks like a human head, but it is very minimalistic, meaning it only has a nose, which tells you that it's meant to be a head, but nothing more than that. It's very abstract. One of the great questions we have about this culture is, why did they portray the human figure so abstractly? And we don't have an answer. We just have a question. Look at another example of a statuette left behind of either a god or a man. We're not sure, but one of the key questions that comes out of this, not only is the abstract head there, again, you know it's in the form of a human being, but then just the nose is portrayed, and then it's got these folded arms across the body. Again, what is the significance there? Unfortunately, we have not deciphered the language of the early Cycladic civilization, the earliest of the Greek civilizations, so all we have is questions. This is another statuette left behind by the Cycladic Greek culture. It is obviously a musical instrument, a woodwind of some kind that's being played. So the presence of music within the important life values of the Cycladic culture, but not much else we can decipher beyond that. Here's another collection of various statuettes. Obviously, some of these, besides having the crossed arms across the waist, they look like feminine figures, have feminine traits. But again, they are gods, they are men or women, we are not sure. We don't have much more than that. The Cycladic civilization is remarkable in that it chooses very intentionally to portray the human figure in a very abstract way. The answers to the questions remain to be resolved, maybe in the future by archaeologists, or findings that we will come up with at a later date. That is about as much as we know. Early ancestors of the Greeks were called a group of people that lived on some islands, 12 islands in the middle of the Aegean Sea. The Aegean Sea is one of the seas of the Mediterranean, and that is as much as we know. 3rd millennium before Christ, the Cycladic world. We move to number 2, the second of the Aegean civilizations, of which we know a lot more. Please note that I'm back at that map that we had before, but I'm asking you to look now down to the lower part of the map, and you'll find the island of Crete. Crete is the largest island in the Mediterranean world, and it's kind of like a southern border to all those nearly 2,000 islands that populate the Greek Sea and the Greek Aegean Sea. There is Greek islands, and there's Greek mainland, which we're going to go to when we head to the Mycenaeans and Sparta and Athens. But right now, as we're looking at the origins of Greek culture, we're looking at island cultures, and right now I'm asking you to focus on the island of Crete, large Greek island in the middle of the Mediterranean, the largest. And in particular, to focus on one of the various cities with palaces that we have found that belong to the Minoan culture. The second of the Aegean cultures that we focus on is the Minoan culture. They get their name, Minoans, from the mythological or real most famous king of their 5.5 centuries of domination of this part of the world. Knossos is the capital where he was, and Minos was the name of a great king that lived and was the king of this island around the 15th century, towards the end of the Minoan period. So here is a quick rundown of the Minoan culture. It existed for about 5 centuries, or a little more than that, from around 2000 to around 1450 before Christ. It's based in Crete, on the island of Crete, and has its major presence in a palace that we have found excavated, reconstructed, called the Palace at Knossos, the major city that I showed you on the map just before. We owe a great debt to an archaeologist, a British archaeologist of the 19th century early 20th, called Sir Arthur Evans. Please make note of this important figure because it is he that went looking for the evidence of this seafaring culture. We've used that term before for the Phoenicians, but that was in the Middle East part of the world. We are now in the central part of the Mediterranean, more or less, and the Minoans are not a warlike people, even though they will exert significant dominance in the Mediterranean world, in the sea world of that time, and the coastal areas around. They are mainly a commercial economy, trade, commerce, not a conquering people. They will have significant significant trade with the Egyptians to the south, and they're relatively peaceful. I say relatively because we do have some inklings, some evidences that they will exert strong domination of coastal cities around the Mediterranean. And that is because they have left behind in their history mythologies, stories. There are partly true, there's a kernel of truth, but then they're embellished with mythology, man-made gods, fake gods, and mythologies. And there are several that are mentioned, three of which are in your hand, on your slide right now. There is the mythology of King Minos and the labyrinth. It is said that on the island of Crete, in the capital of Knossos, King Minos, the most famous of the Minoan kings, built a labyrinth, an intricate web of a building in which was housed a mythological creature that was half man, half bull, the Minotaur. It actually starts like this. King Minos had a wife who was obsessed with the bull. The bull at that time was a symbol within Greek pantheon of gods, a symbol of the god Zeus, or the king of the gods, the head of the godhead, the Greek gods, Zeus. And so she had built for herself a contraption by which she could be impregnated by a bull. Now this seems not only surreal, but more than that. The supposed engineer of this contraption was the Leonardo da Vinci of ancient times. His name was Daedalus, and he had a son named Icarus. And Daedalus was forced to build this contraption by which the queen of Crete, the queen of the Mycenaeans, was impregnated and then gave birth to this half-man, half-bull called the Minotaur, who had to be fed with human flesh. Daedalus, the creator of this, wanted to flee this kind of madness, and he built for himself some wings, and for himself and his son Icarus, and tried to flee the island of Crete by flying away. Here is early desire to conquer the skies, something that, of course, we've achieved only in the early 20th century with the Wright brothers. We are now used to flying everywhere, but in ancient times, in the Minoan culture, there was the great inventor and engineer called Daedalus, who supposedly built the first set of wings by which he and his son tried to fly away from the madness on the island of Crete, brought on by the madness of the Minotaur, a beast that had to be kept within the confines of a labyrinth because of his bestiality, and fed human beings. And that's where the third myth comes in. By the way, the myth of Daedalus and Icarus will end tragically. Daedalus will tell his son, as he puts wings with feathers and wax on him as they fly away, his last instructions will be, don't fly too close to the sun. And of course, as many sons do, he ignores the instructions of the father, flies too close to the sun melts the wax that holds the wings together, the feathers together, and thus Icarus dies in the Aegean Sea. That is one of the myths associated with the Minoan culture. Besides that of the Minotaur and the labyrinth. The third Minotaur connected myth is that of Theseus. Theseus was a prince of the city of Athens on the Greek coastland, and the legend has it that as the King Minos did not want to feed the Minotaur in the labyrinth with his own young people, young men and women of the island of Crete. He therefore exerted his influence on the cities nearby in the Mediterranean Sea by forcing them to contribute. 7 young men, 7 young women, says the legend, to feed the Minotaur. And thus, the legend of Theseus is that he, the prince of Athens, decided to put a stop to this kind of human sacrifice to the Minotaur, and thus went on an expedition to kill the Minotaur. His father, Aegeus, knew that he was going on a very dangerous mission, and thus pleaded with him to change the flags on his ship when he sailed back from black to white if he had been victorious. That is the instructions that that particular father gave his son Theseus as he sailed off to kill the Minotaur. Theseus does reach the island of Crete. He gets into the labyrinth thanks to a stratagem, is able to not only kill the Minotaur, but also to make his way out of the labyrinth, but then forgets on his way back home to replace the flag, and thus a distraught father, Aegeus, seeing the ship of his son sail home and still with the black flag, believes his son has been killed in that attempt to kill the Minotaur, and thus he throws himself into the Aegean Sea, and thus the origin of the name of the sea, the Aegean Sea, from a distraught father. Here another case embedded in Minoan mythology of a son that does not listen to the instructions of a father. So important mythologies coming out of this island and this culture of Greek mythology. Here is a artist's reconstruction of the palace. I've been dealing with mythologies, and of course, the Minotaur doesn't exist, the Greek gods don't exist, but there's a kernel of truth. Did King Minos exist? Was there a labyrinth in the great palace of Knossos? Well, what Sir Arthur Evans found when he went to excavate the palace was an intricate 5-story high, intricate web design, a labyrinth, so to speak, in the palace of Knossos. And this is an artistic reconstruction of what that incredible palace with hundreds of rooms and galleries and tunnels and rooms and palaces and throne rooms, truly a labyrinth of intricate proportions in the palace of Knossos of the Minoan culture. Here is part of the reconstructed palace that Sir Arthur Evans found, with the various levels and rooms and stories of it. This is staircases, and they use the post and lintel system quite often to build not only stories and levels, but also doors and entrances. This palace was destroyed by an explosion of a volcano about 100 nautical miles to the north that happened around 1450 before Christ, that not only caused gigantic fires, earthquakes, but also then a gigantic tidal wave, a tsunami that hit it and basically extinguished Minoan culture with this natural disaster. Here you see a typical guard tower of the Minoan culture. They loved color, very decorative. Notice, please, the type of columns that they use. They are, in a sense, inverted. They're thicker at the top and thinner at the bottom. That is not the way the Minoans saw it, but it's the way in which we see it, because columns will take the opposite direction in the centuries to come. They will have thicker at the bottom and thinner at the top. Notice, please, the beautiful frescoes of bulls. The importance of the bull, therefore the connection to the Minotaur, the god Zeus, all of that, that's right there. Very, very colorful civilization. This is another typical reconstruction of the moments in the palace of Knossos of the King Minos and the Minoan culture. The horns are clearly visible. Hundreds of these are all over the rooftops, but some gigantic versions of what look like horns, the horns of a bull, are evident and are a symbol of the Minoan culture. We have found in the ruins of the palace gigantic granaries, a testament to the fact that they, of their diet, dates and olive oil and wine, and these are gigantic terracotta vats that contained the rich array of food items that were part of the Aegean Minoan culture. A segment of the walls inside one of the throne rooms shows you beautiful vegetation on the island of Crete that's being portrayed in fresco paintings on the walls of the throne room of King Minos. This is a vase of the Minoan culture. They don't paint warriors and warfare, but they paint instead what are important elements of their culture, which is dolphins and sea and blue Aegean Sea. They are for the most, a mercantile, a merchant culture. So their defenses to their island are the sea. The sea are the walls that defend them. They don't have to build gigantic walls of protection like we will see before and after them. You have to be able to build a navy and sail the high seas to be any threat to the Minoans. They have figured out how to do that, how to sail the high seas, because they are an island culture, and thus they have dolphins that they prefer on their vases. One of the symbols that tragically today symbolizes Nazi culture is actually originally Minoan. Please note what goes down now into history as the swastika is an early, actually Minoan symbol and has nothing to do with the Nazi policies, concentration camps, etc. This is originally a Minoan symbol. Some of the things, metal tablets with which they traded. Remember that coins will develop later in time in Lydia, but in the 15th century before Christ, when the Minoans are at their peak, this is the kind of items that were used to trade, to buy. They were large metal plates. The Minoans also will see the development of theater. Theater will become theater, meaning productions where you have either comedies or tragedies, stories that end well or stories that end not so well, will be produced originally in places like this. This is in the palace of King Minos in Knossos, and this is where early theatrical productions we put on. Our versions of movies originally are live actors playing parts in theatrical productions, and right here in early Greek ancestors called the Minoans, we see the beginning of this. Other images from the Minoan palace, the sport of boxing. So you can see the trait of these boxers. One of the most famous paintings on the palace of the Knossos of the Minoans. Notice, please, that the eyes are kind of like in the Egyptian form, look out towards you instead of looking towards each other. One of the other sports that's prominent in the Minoan culture is bull jumping. So you see that a athlete is running towards a bull that is charging, and this is the same athlete in three different, you could say, moments. He runs towards the bull, grabs the horns, does a somersault in the middle, and then lands on the back. This must have been a very interesting sport, bull jumping in Minoan culture. Here's an image of a Minoan prince. So you see the beautiful plants of the vegetation of Crete around him, and then you see in a short skirt, and then you see wavy hair, and this very interesting headset that he has on. A quick glimpse at the throne room of King Minos with the inverted columns. And then you see the throne to the right, not a large throne room, but where he would receive envoys from different cultures. On the back side of the throne of King Minos in that throne room is this interesting animal, part a lion, a symbol of royalty, kings, and then an animal that are very prominent. The head is that of a peacock. In the head of the animal, this hybrid animal that is on the wall behind King Minos. This is an image again from the Minoan walls of that palace of young princesses of Minoan culture with long vestments that are split down to the navel and expose breasts. Beautiful. Notice the eyes, please, still. Notice the outline of the face of these princesses, and then the eyes that instead face out your way, kind of like in the way of the Egyptians. So we think that they have seen Egyptian culture in their trading moments. This is called the snake goddess. She is we think it's a snake goddess, exposed breasts and snakes in her hand, with an interesting headset on and a dress that is reminiscent of 17th and 18th century Western cultural dresses, but belongs actually to the 15th century before Christ, the snake goddess of the Minoan culture. Here's an octopus. Again, dolphins, octopi, sea urchins, sea animals populate their terracotta items and not warriors. This is a bowl. It's actually a receptacle for wine or honey. You take those horns and you can pour libation to the gods on their altars through the mouth of the bull, and so behind the head is a cavity, and you pour items through this beautiful ornate item that is used as a vessel for pouring libations to the gods. This is the language of the early Minoans. It's called Linear A, and we have not deciphered it. So we are waiting to find some key, some instrument by which we can understand the writings of the early Minoans. On the other hand, the last century and a half of Minoan culture, they start using another kind of alphabet called Linear B, which we have deciphered. So in the last part of this culture, before it's destroyed by the tsunami, we have figured out how to read part of their stories. This is in Linear A and still to be deciphered. It's a very interesting either a religious ritual or a story of a god or a king. We're not sure. We're waiting to decipher it. One last image. This is a symbol coming down again. Dozens of these, if not hundreds of them. The double axe. The axe is a symbol of a Minoan culture as well. Quite prominent throughout the palace. Probably not used actually in warfare, but will become a symbol of Minoan culture. This concludes a quick look at the first two early Aegean civilizations. Early Aegean civilizations part 2 will focus on the Mycenaeans, which are the third important early Aegean civilization.